Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another wonderful session of CMA Australia CFO Talk seminar series. Today, we've got Professor Janek Ratnatunga with us today. What we're going to talk about is quite a critical topic in the scheme of things in the day that we live in. It's about plastic pollution. And what Professor has done a little bit of research on that factor is about it's more than a pollution, it's more like a pandemic in the plastic environment. So just a little bit of housekeeping before I hand it over to Professor Janek. We will have the session for about 40 minutes. That is, Professor Janek will present for 40 odd minutes. And after that, we will have question and answer sessions. And we encourage you to type in your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen that you have. The chat box feature has been disabled. So all your questions, please direct it to the Q&A box. Professor Janek, thank you very much for giving us your time, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Chintan. Let me welcome everyone while I share my screen. Okay. All okay, Chintan? Can see
yes,
it?
Yes, all good.
So welcome everyone. I know it's morning, afternoon, evening, night at all parts of the world. There are people from Europe and New Zealand and Africa and so on here. So welcome to you all. This actually is a global issue, and it's good that we have a global audience here. So essentially, what we call a black swan event, I'm sure you all have heard this many times since COVID-19. At first, Europeans believed that black swans did not exist, right? They had only seen white swans. But when they came to Australia and they saw a black swan, they said, oh, well, it's extremely rare event, but it is perhaps a predictable event. Okay, so maybe there could be a place where there could be black swans. So it's rare, but predictable. Today, a black swan event is one that, while being extremely rare and of severe impact, is nevertheless characterized by the widespread insistence that they were obvious in hindsight. So the COVID-19 pandemic was described as such an event, okay, where basically they said, yes, in fact, people like Bill Gates and so on, a couple of years ago, predicted such a thing could happen, and we've had SARS and so on. Okay, so a green swan event is environmental damage, is a swan of a different color, a green one. Green swans are consequence of the risk that we humans create for ourselves by pumping contaminants into our air and water, by destroying our ecosystems and destabilizing our climate. Because that is a green swan. Some causes of an impending green swan event, like global warming, climate change, are already well studied. We've had perhaps a not so successful event in COP26 that happened, but in Glasgow, but these are being well studied. However, other causes still remain hidden, such as the looming plastic pollution pandemic. This can have equally devastating consequences of triggering a green swan event of an ecological disaster. And that's what unfortunately, I got quite depressed when I did this research. Okay, it could be quite a disaster, which in hindsight, we say, oh, it was quite obvious. But it will, when it happens, it will be of great concern, because a green swan, unfortunately, is a dead swan. And that means what will happen to our world. Okay, so let's look at plastic. In 1955, the Life magazine had an entire article about what they call throwaway living. And they celebrated it, the fact that we could have all these fantastic things that we could throw away without washing and doing all those things. Little did they know that in just one generation, one lifetime, okay, it would have significant impact on our lives, just in one generation. So let's look at how it went from convenience to curse, okay. Initially, as you saw from that Life magazine article, plastic was the hero. Okay, there have been many iterations of plastic since about 1862, all sorts of rayon and Teflon and all sorts of things. But it was actually when engineer Nathaniel Wyeth in 1973 patented what we now call, I can't even pronounce it, okay, but we call it PET, that the world order changed. And the reason for PET was that it was fantastic. It could hold essentially pressurized carbonated liquid without any problem. Okay. They were also much cheaper alternative to glass bottles, which is the other thing that could hold pressurized liquid. And the benefits of these was undisputable. Okay. They're very resource efficient by having a relatively low lifetime cost compared with competing materials such as aluminum cans and glass bottles, and the whole host of things that certainly they have as benefits. So higher strength to weight ratio, stiffness, toughness, all of these things are their non-toxicity and so on. Okay, these are great strengths, but these strengths are also going to be the weaknesses and the real problem with plastic. Okay, so that was the time it was a hero, and there was one moment in history which is very interesting, that it went into cult status. Evian started selling bottled water in PET bottles. Interesting side comment is that Evian opposite is naive, which is of course a person who's not very sure or not very clueful about what's happening. Anyway, Evian started selling bottled water in PET bottles, and perhaps the actual occasion that the plastic was given cult status was probably the day that New York supermodels started carrying tall bottles of Evian water as an accessory on the fashion show catwalks. This happened in the 80s, 1980s. Suddenly the world went mad. Okay? That perhaps is the moment in history. This was the signal that if it is acceptable by high society, it is acceptable by all. So you could see these sorts of advertisements Evian did. Okay, Maria Sharapova, the tennis player, you can see the sort of advertisement they were doing. Okay, basically to live, live, live. Okay, so essentially, since that time, billions of bottles of water have been sold on the promise that bottled water is good for hair and skin, healthier than soft drinks, and safer than tap water. The last one is interesting. Okay, safer than tap water. Probably now we know it may not be. Okay. Anyway, it didn't take consumers long to buy into the notion that they needed water within reach virtually everywhere they went. You can't go anywhere without your bottle of water. Doesn't matter if you're in countries like Australia or Singapore, where you can get perfectly good, healthy tap water. Okay. In fact, some of the tap water, like in Australia, it has fluoride, which is good for the teeth. Doesn't matter. You still had to have that fashion statement next to you, which is a bottle of water. Okay. So I have given hundreds of seminars in countries where there's perfectly good tap water, where they have in every table a bottled water, plastic bottled water. And plastic then took over. Plastic took over. You can see this is, of course, in China, okay, and Hong Kong and so on. You can see everything is plastic, okay. Even the stools that they sit on are plastic. Here it is, the plastic world, okay. All those flowers, all okay, fake, all plastic. So plastic just went crazy, okay. And of course, then slowly we started realizing that plastic actually is a villain. Okay, by the first decade of the by the first decade and a half of the 21st century, this once celebrated invention had become almost like a disease. It has spread into significant number of commodities sold today, including forks and spoons, toothbrushes. There were earlier toothbrushes are perfectly good with wood and bristles. Now it's all plastic. And of course, these are pictures of what happens after you finish with the toothbrush. Okay. Plastic wraps, plastic clamshell containers, which had to be just thrown away after use. Okay. Cigarette butts. Can you imagine cigarette butts have plastic in it? Tampons and pads. The shoes that you wear, the sneakers, have plastic in it and they end up in landfills and so on. Tires, and in fact, hospitals are filled with sterile single-use plastic to keep healthcare hygienic. Now, why tires? tires are, I suppose, rubber. No. Today's tires have whole lot of plastic in it, and which you can't then recycle. Okay, so this has become a curse now. All over the world, we are just dumping this stuff. So the world awakes then. Okay, the world is now awakened to the crisis of plastic waste. Okay, homeowners are now struggling to rid their lives of this material in an effort to go green. So we can't help it. We have plastic wraps, cling wraps or glad wraps as we call it in Australia. Okay, also a plastic container with a wrap in top, which then you can't recycle. I'll talk about recycling a little bit more later. Okay, the backlash against the glut of discarded plastic commodities has been swift. They are clogging waterways, polluting the oceans, and littering the interior. Okay, suddenly carrying plastic bottles of water around has become very, very uncool in many countries. Okay, very uncool. So let's now analyze this from a point of view of a management accountant. There are actually two different issues that often are confused but should not be confused. One is the production of plastic and the greenhouse gases and so on, and energy that is required for the production process, and the consumption of plastic. Okay, very different. The energy emissions issue related to plastic production, okay, and the pollution issues related to plastic consumption and excessive littering. So that is two totally different areas. Okay, it may be excellent in terms of reduced emission issues in terms of greenhouse gases, but it has a huge problem in the littering area. Now, the studies on plastic bottles fall into two categories: those that highlight plastic green credentials in terms of energy efficiency in manufacturing, distribution, and recycling, and plastic being a green alternative to most materials: paper, metal, glass, and alternative bio-based materials. How is it a greener alternative? What these studies show is that if you get something like glass, you have to wash it all the time, or even a bag made out of cloth has to be washed, and that washing requires energy, and that energy, also the water, is used. So if you take all of that into account, okay, there are lots of studies that highlight that in fact plastic is highly efficient in terms of energy consumption. I'm not saying I agree with it, but there are a lot of studies that are there with these green credentials. The other side is the huge amount of studies that show what an environmental and social disaster it is in terms of its role in pumping contaminants into our air and water, destroying our ecosystems, and destabilizing our climate. So these are the two different types of studies. Okay, now the big issue, of course, is access to drinking water. That's why we are carrying it around in a plastic bottle. Okay, according to the United Nations, the developing world has 2.2 billion people who still do not have access to clean drinking water. However, these people cannot afford to buy sealed plastic bottles of water. Instead, they often fill used and unwashed bottles with contaminated water. Okay. In such countries, it is the tourists who can buy a sealed bottle of water, and they see this as the only safe option to drink in the tap water. Quite correctly, of course. Okay, they drink the water, unfortunately, because there is no proper way to throw it away, because there's no waste management systems in some of these more developing countries. They just throw it away. They think, it's just one bottle of water, which should be okay. But it's not. Okay, there's no proper trash collection system in these beautiful tourist locations. So what has happened? Due to the lack of organized trash collection systems, pristine tourism sites are now littered with plastic bottles and containers. Go to Sri Lankan heritage sites, Myanmar temples, Bali beaches, all polluted. Okay, this uncontrolled litter leads to a pollution pandemic that ultimately severely damages our environment. Okay, so if you can control the litter, it will be good. If you don't control it, the hidden green swan will emerge. Look at where the plastic is. On the top of Mount Everest, the highest point on Earth, and in the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Okay, the lowest point on Earth. Plastic is everywhere. It is not just plastic, but plastic litter. Okay, it's a big issue. Now, I want to quickly tell you a difference between clean and green. Often the two are confused. Clean does not mean green, and as I told you, often the two are confused. Clean is the absence of pollutants in the air and water. Okay? Air pollution is contamination of indoor or outdoor environment by any chemical, physical or biological agent that modify the natural characteristics of the atmosphere. So, for example, when you have huge amounts of pollutants going out, okay, not carbon dioxide, I'll talk about that in a minute, but just pollutants going out from the back end of a tail of a car and so on, these are air pollution. And you can see places like New Delhi and Shanghai and so on, full of these contaminants. Household combustion devices, motor vehicles, industrial facilities, and forest fires are common sources of air pollution. Okay. Pollutants of major public health concerns include particulated matter, carbon monoxide, not carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, little different, you die with this thing, ozone, nitrogen dioxide, and sulfur dioxide. Okay. Plastic carried by the wind is also, in a sense, a pollutant because it takes all sorts of dirt and rubbish and germs and all with it. Okay. So this is what is not clean. Okay. Water pollution on that is release of substances into bodies of water that make the water unsafe for human use and disrupts the aquatic systems, ecosystems. Water pollution can be caused by a plethora of different contaminants, including toxic waste, petroleum, disease-causing microorganisms, and in more recent times, plastic and microplastic litter. I'll talk about microplastics in a little while. This is a huge issue. Okay, but these are what goes into the oceans, okay, and are having massive problems to our ecosystems. While these pollutants are obviously not clean, they are nevertheless green, in that they do not directly trap the sun's heat in the Earth's atmosphere and make the Earth much warmer than it would be. Interesting point. Okay, these do not trap the sun's heat, but we can't breathe this and we die. The fish eat it and all of these things. Okay, so they are not clean, but they don't trap the sun's atmosphere, sun's rays. Okay, so they are actually green. Okay, now let's look at what we mean by green. Green is having systems in place to reduce greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases are mainly CO2, which is carbon dioxide, and CH4, methane. Okay, methane comes from the back of livestock. Okay, methane is about 8 times worse than carbon dioxide, but we don't get killed by this. We don't get killed, right? These gases are transparent to incoming short-wave radiation from the sun, but block infrared long-wave radiation from leaving the Earth's atmosphere. So they are the ones that trap the greenhouse gas, that traps the Earth's sunlight and bounces it back so the Earth gets warmer. But we can survive in this, okay? With carbon dioxide and methane, we can't survive with the other gases like sulfur dioxide and so on. However, CO2 and CH4 are nevertheless clean, and they do not cause outdoor and indoor air pollution that results in respiratory and other diseases, especially in humans. And often this is confused. Okay, so now let's look at the impact of plastic on the environment. As one can see, there are two interrelated issues here. Plastic production and the greenhouse gases emitted by that, including the recycling process, and the plastic consumption, the deadly impact of littering on air, water pollution, wildlife, and the spread of diseases. So these are the two different things that we are going to look at now in more detail. Okay. There are many studies done on the whole of life impact of greenhouse gas emissions related to plastic. On balance, most studies show that on a per unit basis, now important, on a per unit basis, plastic emits less greenhouse gases than a similar product. that uses renewable materials such as glass and aluminum, because you don't have to wash it and all of those sorts of things. This sort of reasoning has given rise to some arguments that plastic is a green alternative to most materials. Okay, now this is the kicker, the last bit here. If it is not released as litter, they say, oh, plastic is great. If it is not released as litter, it's like a side comment. Okay. Now this, of course, such an argument I call a straw man fallacy. Let me explain what a straw man fallacy is. A straw man is a form of argument that gives the impression of refuting an argument, whereas the real subject of the argument was not addressed or refuted, but instead replaced by a false one. One who engages in the fallacy is said to be attacking a straw man. Okay. Now there's an author, quite a vocal author called Chris D. Amit, author of a book called Plastic Paradox. He has built such a straw man, in my opinion, by quoting the many arguments that say that plastic is not green. So he says, oh, all these papers that plastic is not green is not true. Plastic does not emit that much of greenhouse gases. Okay, he has gone to 60 Minutes and Sky News and so on. But that is a straw man. We are not talking about the amount of greenhouse gases. We are talking about the problem of littering and pollution, which is the second issue. That is the big issue that is causing irreversible damage to the planet's ecosystem. That is completely ignored. So he's attacking the straw man and ignoring the real issue, which is littering and huge pollution pandemic. So Mr. Demamit has not addressed the potential green swan impact of plastic pollution pandemic, but instead attacked the greenhouse gas emissions of the straw man he has created. Okay, so let's look at these greenhouse gases anyway. Of course, on a unit basis, clearly plastic emits less greenhouse gases, okay, in the whole process. But on a total basis, it's a completely different story. Production has increased exponentially from 2.3 million tons in 1950 to over 600 million tons by 2020. This production is expected to double by 2050. Look at the pollution we have already, right? A recent report predicted that plastic in the United States alone is on track to release more greenhouse gas emissions than coal-powered electricity generating plants by the end of the decade. So it's a completely different story when you take the total. Okay. There are also many studies that show that bottled water is a drain on the environment in many ways. Transport the bottles and keeping them cold emits greenhouse gases. Groundwater pumping by bottled water companies draws heavily on underground aquifers and harms watersheds. This has caused significant unrest in developing countries where most cities depend on direct access to water table via wells and rivers. So these people are agitating. All the big companies, and I'm not talking about the big ones, of course, we know the big ones, okay? Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Nestle, and so on. They're drawing the water for their bottles, and the local people are suffering because of the result. So there are other aspects as well. Okay, now let's look at the plastic consumption issue. More than a million plastic bottles are sold every single minute globally. Half of all plastics ever manufactured have been made in the last 15 years. Every year, about 8 billion tons of plastic waste escapes into oceans from coastal nations. That is equivalent of setting 15 garbage bags full of trash on every meter of coastline around the world. Just imagine 15 garbage bags around all the coasts around the world. Plastics often contain additives, making them stronger, more flexible, and durable. All excellent qualities, as I mentioned. Okay, but these very qualities makes a plastic bottle last 450 years to decompose. Okay, so here are the decomposal periods that are estimated. A cigarette butt is 5 years. Okay, and you can see plastic bags 20 years and so on. Okay, so when they say biodegradable, be careful, it may be in 450 years. Okay, and a glass, of course, is over 1 million, but glass doesn't float and pollute. Okay, and you can recycle it. But these are the ones that are really, really big. And look at those periods there. So what is litter? That's a big problem. It sounds a simple word, oh, litter. The word originated used to describe any rubbish that was not household waste, that is small things such as cans, bottles, paper that people leave lying around on the streets and other public places. Littering in developed countries, is when someone throws a cigarette butt or a can out of a car window. That is littering. But in developing countries, okay, there's no trash cans anywhere. When you're walking on the streets, even there's no trash cans. So litter is simply thrown on the street, in the waterway, or on a beach. Okay, look at this. These are regular sights in developing countries. Okay, streets full of trash. Unfortunately, what each individual considers as a minor littering misdeed, oh, it's just one cigarette butt, one bottle, when considered collectively, has a deadly impact on the environment. Okay. This litter leads mainly to water pollution, and the disaster that can be caused by excessive litter that does not degenerate is no longer a potential threat, but a very, very real one. Okay. So here is plastic's deadly legacy. In our oceans, which provide the largest natural carbon sink for greenhouse gases, plastic leaves a deadly legacy. It directly chokes and smothers a host of marine animal habitats and take hundreds of years to break down. Sunlight and heat cause the plastic to release powerful greenhouse gases that cause global warming. So the plastic itself, due to sunlight, releases the greenhouse gases. Okay. This leads to an alarming feedback loop. As the planet gets hotter, the plastic breaks down into more methane and ethylene. This increases the rate of climate change, so perpetuated cycle. So that causes more global warming and so on. So in terms of air pollution, in addition to water pollution, plastic can also pollute the air. Researchers estimate that more than 40% of the world's litter is burnt in open air, which can release toxic emissions. So how often have you seen this in developing countries? They just take the plastic and they set it on fire. Okay, they incinerate it. These emissions can cause respiratory issues, other health problems, and even be a starting base for acid rain. Okay, so there's both direct and indirect things that can happen when you burn plastic like this. Further, improperly discarded trash is a breeding ground for bacteria and diseases. Litter can spread diseases, viruses, and parasites through two methods: direct, straight into you, or it is eaten by someone else, animal or fish, and then into you. So both could cause major problems. Okay. So this is the sort of thing that can happen with plastic litter. It can be carried all over, eaten, and then comes back to you either directly or indirectly. Now, the biggest issue for me, the one that really depresses me, is these microplastics. Okay, microplastics that get into waterways originate from broken bits of takeaway containers and straws, tiny fibers from activewear like your sneakers, plastic shed by synthetic products. Okay, these are things that become smaller and smaller. Okay, rather than break down, they just get smaller until they are invisible to the naked eye. That's why they're called microplastics. Okay, these are blown as wisps in the wind, end up in our waterways. Once in the ocean, it is difficult, if not impossible, to retrieve plastic waste. Researchers estimate that over 1 million animals die each year after ingesting or becoming entrapped in improperly discarded trash. Clearly, it is excessive litter and not greenhouse gas emissions that is a real issue. And if not tackled, can lead to a green swan catastrophe. So, talking about the efficiency of greenhouse gases is a non-issue. It's a straw man. We really have to talk about the litter, especially what happens. There are people who try to block the plastic from getting into the oceans. They can't stop microplastics. That's the problem. And this gets into fish, and then ultimately we may also be digesting this. Okay. Now let's look at the other issue, recycling. We are all asked to recycle. I consider this the big con. Okay. The plastics and chemical industry realized in the 1970s, when the PET bottles came, that if governments made them responsible for bearing the cost of recycling, it would make their product uneconomical. They couldn't sell it. So what did they do? They put the onus of responsibility on this whole process on us, the consumer, an ethical responsibility. They came up with the 3R, okay, reduce, reuse, recycle, with huge advertising budgets to make us feel that we should recycle and be good citizens. Okay, so they came up with the recycle logo. I think all of you have seen this. Also, each type of product was also given a different logo. Okay, so we had to then separate out ourselves. Okay, even though the plastic industry well knew that much of the plastic we so-called recycle still end up in landfills or will be incinerated. Only 10% of plastic waste can be actually commercially recycled. Yes, you can put the logo on something and say it can be recycled. It can be recycled in a lab. The reality is 90% are not recycled. So this is the thing, right? This is our perception when we are separating out our bottles and so on, that they're all going to be sorted out very nicely in these big factories and then recycled back again into plastic bottles. That is our perception, that we're doing the right ethical thing by separating. The reality is this: they're open dumps filling up, okay, and they're being blown to the wind, going to the waterways. That is the reality. 90% is what happens here. Of course, different countries have a different percentage. For example, Norway really does recycle 90%, USA about 35%, but globally 90% not recycled. What we need really is not plastic to recycle, but plastic free. Now here's a company that is selling toilet paper. Okay, the paper itself does not use trees, it uses grass, bamboo, right? The wrapping, okay, all of that, there's no plastic in it. Okay, so this is what we need: plastic free rather than recycling. So we really don't need the recycling logo. We need logos that say this has no plastic, rather than you can recycle the plastic, because of recycled plastic, we know 90% doesn't get recycled. Okay, so now as management accountants, what are the economic solutions that we have? Getting consumers to recycle for ethical reasons, as I've just shown you, is not working. Okay, we are doing a good job, but at the end of it, they're not recycling it, it's just going to dumps. Therefore, governments, corporations, and scientific establishments need to turn to economic solutions. The good news is that the world is awash with solutions for bottles. Lots of people are doing this. Generally, the efforts fall into two categories. One is reducing the quantity of new bottles produced. So try to reduce the new bottles produced. Recycling would be a old bottle that is recycled, okay, especially of single-use containers. And second one is dealing with ways to deal with the discarded bottle. What to do with the discarded bottles? Once they're thrown away, what can we do? Okay, so these are the two things that we are looking at. So method one of reducing the quantity of new bottles is recycling. Okay, obviously we've talked about that before. Okay, the quantity of new bottles produced can be dramatically reduced with recycling. This requires, of course, bottles to be collected in the first place. No point having a massive recycling plant if no one is collecting the bottles to recycle. So we have to add some added value to that recycling. Now in the old days, there was a value created to recycle glass bottles. You paid some money to get the bottle back. We need that sort of thing now. Okay, this can be achieved through charging an additional price for bottle recovery. If a company chooses to sell water in a single serving container, then the consumer should have to pay the full cost of delivering that water in a single serving container, which includes the cost of recovering that container. This is where management accounting and life cycle costing comes in. So that's method one, recycling, a price for the recovery. Method two is called the circular economy. Now, this is a term that is often being used, okay, to people realizing what it is. Instead of feeding into the convoluted recycling process, which is directly energy intensive because you have to collect the bottles, then use energy to recycle it. We can then replace single-use containers with reusable containers. But remember, reusable containers also is energy intensive because washing and all of that also takes energy. Okay, these containers would most often be a durable metal or glass vessel that can be refilled either at a store location by the manufacturer or in a consumer's own home. So reusable bottles. There are studies calculating the payback period associated with the reusable item. That's the number of times you can use it before it either breaks down or the energy consumption becomes more than a non-reusable bottle. Okay, there are lots of studies done. Okay, but unfortunately, in all of these studies, they do not add on the cost of littering. They just say the energy consumption. Ignore the littering as a side effect, but really the biggest problem is the littering issue. Okay, now new ways to deal with discarded bottles. We can manufacture other items. They've even printed in cartridge French post, and they've even done a house with discarded bottles that can stand, I think, a force 5 cyclone, I think, in Canada, right? They've done a house with bottles. Method 2 is to pursue design and recycled solutions for faster decomposition of litter. So there are things called start of pipe and end of pipe solutions. Start of pipe solutions is before we actually consume the bottle, what we can do, and that would be smart design, packaging, biodegradable or compostable single-use plastic items. So these are before the item that you're buying already has got the design in it. But if you buy something that is not designed like that, then you have end of pipe solutions. At the end of the pipe, when you discard the bottle, chemical recycling, they return the polymers to their consequent monomers, enabling them to be remolded multiple times. And then also they're experimenting with plastic munching bacteria species, but they haven't been able to scale up these to tackle the problem yet. Okay, these are all in the early stages, still not able to scale up to the level that we want. So those are start of pipe and end of pipe solutions. Of course, the start of pipe makes the most sense. Okay, catch the thing before they actually buy the bottle. Now, Singapore has a very interesting solution that must be talked about. Singaporeans have realized, they're very practical people, that this 3R is not working. Okay, because it's all ending up in rubbish dumps anyway. It's a waste of time. So they say, okay, you can dispose you can even use a plastic. Okay, then they have a very good system of collecting that trash, very good efficient management system. And then what they do is they burn the trash, filter in the smoke to remove harmful pollutants. Okay, so all the toxic pollutants are filtered out. Okay, all the things that are bad for us to breathe. And then the residue ash is dumped responsibly. How do they do that? They put it into a water slurry and they dump it into a man-made island, in a lake of a man-made island. Okay, and they slowly fill up that island. Okay, so it doesn't go to the marine because it's within the boundaries. They fill up, okay, the slurry. So the slurry means it doesn't blow to the wind. This solution offers an additional benefit. The heat from the burnt trash is harnessed to power thousands of homes in Singapore with electricity. So there's a lot of homes that are powered by burning, okay, the incineration. The harmful gases are filtered out so that air is emitted from the incineration plant is very clean. They are claiming, the Singaporeans are claiming that the air that is pumped out of these chimneys are cleaner than the air around it. They have cleaned it so much. Now remember, the kicker here, clean does not mean green. So there's a lot of carbon dioxide going on, not a lot because they're using a lot of it for burning and powering the electricity, but still a lot of greenhouse gases are going out. But they're clean. Okay, as I told you, clean and green is different. Okay, but Singapore solution is a very, very good solution for the short term. So we need some immediate solutions. I think the United Nations must, in my personal opinion, as have been a lot of others as well, they must immediately ban the use of single-use plastic. Now, there are 170 countries that have pledged to reduce their carbon, and in certain items, they say they are going to ban it. Okay. They also have to really institutionalize waste management in all countries, not just rich countries and the poor people pollute. Just like the COVID-19 vaccine, everyone must have proper waste management techniques, and it has to be financed. Okay. Every country needs to be provided with enough garbage trucks and other sophisticated waste management equipment, okay, to do this. Instead of trash ending up in top of mountains or bottom of oceans, it can be collected on a regular basis, just as the Singaporeans do. Landfill, recycled, or burned in a controlled way. Okay, so that's the immediate solutions. The longer term solutions is ultimately to go to smart design and smart packaging, and we need to get these scaled up to a level that it becomes acceptable that any company, even a little cafe at the end of the road, can sell their coffee in some of these smart packaged items. Okay, these are essentially low-tech solutions that takes design back to the future of pre-plastic days. I mean, we survived very well in the 1950s. We didn't get sick or anything when there was no plastic. We had paper bags, we had all of that, and we did very well. And we really have to take design back to the future. Okay, back to the future if you want to really control this. And the United Nations is the one that can do this for us. Pre-plastic days. Such solutions hold the best hope of preventing the hidden green swan event from eventuating. Okay. Now, how can all this be financed? You can't be putting waste management systems in the developing countries. It has to be financed. Well, there's some financing solutions. Taxing consumption. Governments can tax the consumer through higher prices and use the extra funds generated to finance the cost of waste management, such as collecting bottles centrally. However, this will probably be as ineffective as carbon tax. As ineffective as a carbon tax. Okay, companies simply keep on littering and pay the tax and pass the tax to the consumer. Also, it will be difficult to police small scale manufacturing companies to pay the tax. Basically, a tax won't work. So what you need is to not tax consumption, but tax production. A better way is to impose a tax at the source of the problem, the plastic industry. Okay. A worldwide tax of 2 cents for every kilo of plastic resin manufactured has been estimated to raise roughly $6 billion a year into a global fund. This fund could be used to finance garbage collection systems in developing nations, so that we can at least control the trash rather than go into waterways and mountains and so on. I think also that the best way, and this is what CMA-NZ is trying to push, is that we need a cap and trade system very much like the carbon credit system. Okay, a plastic credit can be defined as, say, 1 kilo of plastic resin that is either recycled. How do you recycle it? By making sure that good waste management systems are available, or safe from being manufactured by using alternative materials. Okay, these are, if companies use it, they can get a plastic credit. Okay, and this credit can be bought and sold. Okay, those that have excess credit can sell it to those that require the credit. So this can be, definitely we can have a cap and trade system for this. Okay, that is, I believe, how we can prevent the plastic industry from simply going on producing plastic without any concern at all. So to finish up, my concluding comments: planet or plastic? The voluntary efforts of using the 3R campaign and the recycled logo are just not working. Only 10% is actually recycled. Therefore, we should go back to the future of the 1950s by banning all plastic single-use consumption products. If such a drastic move is not particularly feasible, remember the plastic industry is very strong, the onus for the recovery and recycling must be put on the plastic industries and not on the consumer's ethics. The pricing mechanism should include the recovery and recycling costs of the manufactured plastic. The best way to do this is to impose a cap and trade system with plastic credits, similar to a carbon credit system, to finance a global waste management system for the recovery, recycling, and controlled incineration of plastic litter. So in the short term, like what Singapore has done. Okay. In the longer term, we can get good design going. These are the only workable short-term solution to curb excessive plastic pollution until the technology can be scaled up. Management accountants have the tools and techniques of getting the pricing of the plastic credit right. Okay, so thank you for that. And now before I go, please go and reduce your consumption of single-use plastic. Okay, right. With that, I'll hand you back to Chintan.
Thanks, Janek. Really concerning, I should say, the presentation not only gives us a bit of insight of what's happening around the world. We sitting in Australia, we think that what we're doing is everything right, but even us, that, recycling is taken to landfill, and all the kind of thing. Even at the government level or local government level, there are issues which has to be addressed. If not now, then I think it's going to be a very dangerous place to live in the next 10 or 20 years kind of thing. Thank you, Janek, for your time again. Now, in terms of questions, we've got quite a number of questions here, Professor. So would you want to take it one by one, Janek? And,
okay, let me see what time. Okay, so the first one says, so depressing. What hope do we have to save us some plastic? When I did this research, I was depressed at the end of it, really depressed. And then I thought, okay, is there any hope? And really the only hope is to tax the plastic industry in some way. And if we can't, I'll continue to be depressed. So that's the only thing I can say about that comment. The next one is, could you please provide the source of decomposition periods of plastic material quoted in your presentation? Well, that sources come from many. I mean, you just look up Google and say sources of decomposition. There are many articles on that, but the actual source is given in the full article that I've written in the On Target magazine that's on the website. So the full source is on that, Dr. Ken. Okay, so you can have a look at that. Okay, the full article is there on the site. The third one is, should there be legislation regulating banning of plastic? Yes, they're actually trying. And as I told you, the United Nations, of course, 170 countries, okay, to pledge to reduce the amount of plastics, but also things like straws and plastic knives and forks. They're planning to ban. Canada, Kenya is very good, by the way, very good in terms of trying to reduce the plastic. So some countries are way ahead of the others. Okay, some parts of India, very good, but still lots are escaping into the waterways. Sri Lanka, Indonesia, unfortunately, and one or two others are one of the biggest polluters. Okay, so some of our members are in countries that are biggest polluters. They have to think about what they can do with their government. Okay, but yes, there is legislation happening, but I think not fast enough. Hi, Janek. Thank you for this timely and very interesting presentation. My concern is either way, tax at consumption or production, the consumer will end up paying the cost. Yeah, I mean, this is the big problem that that's why I don't like a tax, is that it's easier to pass on a tax to the consumer and the companies get away from it. But if they have a cap and trade system, it's not that easy to pass on something, because if you reach your limit, you have to do something to control the limit. So I think that the cap and trade system is the best solution for this, and not really a tax. Okay, but if you can tax the plastic industry, it will be great. But they are very strong, very strong.
I just wanted to add over here, like
Yes.
you spoke about taxing. It's going to be consumers paying it. There has been significant amount of investment in the plastic industry for making it more user-friendly and environmentally friendly as well, in terms of decomposition and the different use. Now, believe me or not, it's just not the bad guy. There are heaps of good use of plastic as well, right? So if you look at disposable products in terms of medicine or other things as well, there are use for it, which is legitimate use that we can use it. But I think there should be more increased investment from the world, especially headed by the developing countries, uh, into biodegradable plastic uses, right? So if the industry itself kind of can make a case for technological advancement in that sort of sense, I think it would be a much better way to use that element plastic in a day-to-day consumption point of view.
Yeah, look, the plastic industry, just like the oil industry, is paying a lot of so-called investment into biodegradable, but we are not told how long it will degrade. I mean, everything degrades after 450 years, right? Similar to the fossil fuel industry saying we are dealing with carbon capture and with clean coal. I mean, clean coal, can you imagine? That's like dry water. Okay, it can't happen. There's nothing called clean coal, but the government is spending huge amounts of money, giving money to the fossil fuel industry for this sort of research. Nothing has been scaled up to the level yet of doing the level that we need urgently. Singaporeans have got something to reduce the litter, but they are still emitting greenhouse gases, but at least in a controlled way. I think that's the only short-term solution is what the Singaporeans are doing. Okay, but biodegradable, all are fantastic, but how long will it take to scale up? That's the big issue. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Can we use plastic bottles rather than recycling to reduce quantity of new bottle collection? Can we reuse plastic bottles? Yes. So reusing, I think I'm not too sure what that question is. If reusing means recycling it back into a plastic bottle, because reusing in some countries may be just washing the plastic bottle. That may not be that hygienic, unlike a glass bottle. Okay, so but if you say recycling in terms of going back to the origin and then making a fresh bottle, that's what companies are doing, but only 10% of bottles are recycled that way. Okay, so yeah, I mean, Nava has a very good point here. In developing nations, the consumer has little power. I know, so that's why the United Nations has to step in and give the countries enough money to get their waste management systems going. But of course, the other issue is corruption. Many of the developing countries, the United Nations may give the money, but where does the money go? Politicians' pockets? That's a different question altogether. But you're right, the consumer has little power. I think in even developed countries, the consumer has very little power now. Chintan, your argument about good uses of plastic, I agree with that, but we had very good medical systems, all of the sterile systems in the prior to plastics. Okay, I don't think that whole issue is single-use plastic. I think you can have plastic that is not single-use, okay, but the single-use plastic is the biggest problem, and I think banning that is the only way we can do it.
I agree. Yeah.
There's another. Hi, Prof. Janek, what are the challenges of environmental accounting and reporting today? That's a big question. In the area of environmental accounting, there are so many different people who are trying to get into the act. The one that I really recommend is GRI, okay, and the environmental standards there. The accounting profession is also trying to get into the act by putting their own environmental standards. There's also other methods of, for example, integrated reporting that the accounting profession have come up with. So there are many areas of environmental accounting, which we can't look at the pros and cons here, but certainly we need to think about these very important issues when we are doing sustainability accounting. Okay. The next question, I'm happy to see a lot of questions here. Do you think that recycling plastic is more harmful to health than plastic? I actually don't have the chemical knowledge to answer that question. But what I'm hearing is even today, the plastic bottles leach plastic, and mothers who are using plastic bottles to feed milk into their children are actually also feeding them plastic, okay, into their system. So the old thing that plastic is non-toxic and doesn't leach, we have already found that it is not correct. Especially if a plastic bottle of milk, say, is heated up in a microwave a little bit and given to a child, it leaches plastic. Okay, so your question is a fresh bottle less harmful than a recycled bottle? I don't know the answer to that, but we have to. It's an interesting question to find out. If your recommendation to ban plastic companies, what about the economic implications of job loss and employment? Okay, this is the issue that is coming up, not only about plastic but about carbon and fossil fuels. Okay, but there are so many studies that have done that that the plastic industry, sorry, the fossil fuel industry, if you ban coal, the other industry that take over, like the solar and all of that, will well make up for the job losses in the fossil fuel industry. I would say the same would apply for plastic industry. Having said that, please note that no point having a job if the world is going to be into a situation that we can't. There will be no world here for us to have a job. So these are situations that you have to think about. Okay, the economic impact will be there. It's a short-term impact, but bigger problem is to get rid of this huge problem we are having that you can see all around us. Okay, there's lots coming here. Let me. Yeah, one is a comment about we need to go to the World Trade Organization and bargain. I'm not 100% sure how that fits into plastic, but certainly good comment there. Okay, so Daniel from Indonesia is asking, did Australia already implement a carbon tax? The answer is yes, right? It has not worked very well. They tried to implement a cap and trade system. For a time it was there, but it hasn't worked. But I think this whole COP26 and everything, I think people have to very seriously find out what they can do about how to reduce the greenhouse gases. So Australia will be looking into that situation very much. We have seen around the world that the cap and trade systems are now going to be once again a very big thing coming up. Okay, like the European Union emissions trading scheme and so on. There'll be more starting up. Is it possible in the long run for the world to shift to the use of plastic to greener alternatives? I hope so. Absolutely hope so, that we can go back to the 50s. Okay, in terms of single-use plastic. I'm not saying to get rid of all plastic. Okay, I mean your computer screens and so on can be probably managed. You may need plastic, but there are so many things like carrying a bottle of water, okay, that can be without the plastic. That's my thing. We should think about going back to 1950s. Okay, how can we lay more focus on smart packaging? What is the financial impact of manufacturing process? Certainly, I mean, today there are a lot of, I think along with banning of single-use plastic, the whole industry of finding alternative in terms of smart design would be catching on. Okay, now there are many supermarket chains that are not accepting products that are packed in something with a film on top that you have to peel out. They say no, we don't want that because that is okay. So manufacturers are finding that their consumers are rejecting the single-use plastic, and I think there will be economic incentive for them to go into better design. Okay, I mean I've seen so many products that I buy. Okay, they're in a nice container which you can recycle technically, but they're with a film on top that you then can't recycle it. So this is the sort of design that we require.
I think Janek, especially supermarkets are big culprits to this in terms of smart packaging and things of that sort. We see on a day-to-day basis, like bananas are being cling wrapped, and put it on a plastic tray as well. Like it's ridiculous to do those things and it all adds up. And all you're going to do is throw that single-use plastic anyway. It's not going to be recycled anyway. So
That's right.
I think from a consumerism point of view, I think we all probably are asking for that, or they've been feeding us that information or those packaging. We as consumers need to, I think, have a movement as well for banning these kind of single-use plastics, which will ultimately lower the consumption.
Okay, I'm very happy with the question that are over here, but I think we are running out of time as well. But I'm going to pick a few. Okay, one was about the reuse of glass bottles, and the question here is, are they harmful? Okay, now I haven't seen any studies that say if you actually wash a glass bottle properly, like Coca-Cola and Pepsi are doing for years before we came up with plastic, I haven't seen anything that is harmful. Okay, maybe I don't know enough chemistry on this one, but I have not seen anything that a glass bottle can be harmful. Okay, if it's properly washed and so on. Okay, of course, remember energy goes for the washing process. So it's not like it doesn't use greenhouse gases, but certainly it is reducing the plastic pollution. Okay. Can plastic fibers be alternate uses of waste plastic? Yeah, okay, I'm not understood. Ah, right. Yes, yes. Look, plastic is being used for all sorts of things. Okay. Apparel, I mean, the shirts that we wear often is plastic. The ties all are plastic. Okay, at least have petroleum as a base, right? There are issues about even the biodegradable aspects of these things. But the biggest problem still is that plastic bottle, the PET bottle, that is highly durable. It lasts 450 years. It floats in the water. It takes contaminants all around. Huge problem. Okay. Okay. Chinta, you better pick some what you think is important because we.
Yeah, I think we're running out of time, so we'll probably spend another couple of minutes as well.
Yeah, okay.
There is the last question, last two questions are quite this thing, Janek, if you can just scroll
Okay, now
down your
the
screen.
two questions I can quickly answer. Is the presentation going to be downloaded? Chintan, you can respond
Yes.
to that one.
So the presentation will not be available for download, but we are recording this session. We will send you a link to the recording probably in the next couple of days. So everyone who's attended today will get a link to view the recording on our website. Yep, so that's all done.
Okay, now the last two questions. One of the things that everyone should really, if you're interested in the article in this area, go and look at the article on the website. It's a very long article. It has huge amount of references. Okay, for you anyone to see from where the information is coming. Okay, so just go and have a look at the main article. So I'll deal with the last two questions now. Major percent of plastic is one-time use. I agree. If we reduce the one-time use, alternatives to one-time plastic, I think this problem will reduce. Of course, that's absolutely correct. Single-use, one-time use plastic, as governments, as United Nations, we should reduce. They can't expect us individuals to handle this problem because it's not working. We really need a big governmental push on this one. Okay. And lastly, my good friend Ungul says, hi, Prof. Janek. Thank you for sharing. Systemic issues only for reporting purposes per se, rather than big strategic issues. Okay, so what Ungul is trying to say is this: all the GRI and accounting, integrated accounting, and all of these things is only for show. Okay, greenwash. Okay, they're not really doing anything. They're just reporting that they're doing. Okay, and that's the unfortunate thing about very much of the sustainability reports. They are really not really doing any action. They're just reporting. Okay. So with that, Chintan, I'll hand you back to you. Okay.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Thank you, Janak. Really, it's a very big topic of discussion, especially in Australia and some of the developing countries, for how to manage the single-use plastic and how to actually reduce that kind of thing as well. So very topical, and thank you for the research. I've read the article which is online and on Target. I encourage every one of you guys to have a look at it as well. It opens quite a lot of different avenues that we need to think about, and also as we as consumers, what we should ask and what we should demand. So with that note, Professor, thank you very much. Everybody, thank you very much for joining us. We will probably send you the link in a couple of days' time. Thank you, Janek.
Thank
And
you.
see you,
Thank you so
everyone.
much, everyone. Thanks for participating.
Thank you. Bye.